Welcome to another Easy Media Photoshop tutorial. Today we are going to learn how to create this Call of Duty thumbnail. Let's get started. First off, we need to create a new canvas at 1280 by 720 pixels. Let's add a solid color rectangular layer by pressing the shortcut U or selecting the rectangle tool in the toolbar. Click once on the canvas and set the size to 1280 by 720, and center a line to the canvas. You can make this any color you wish. We are just going to use this as our canvas mask. We can rename this layer background. We will now drag in our background texture, link to texture provided in the description, and resize until it's 1280 in width, and press enter or click the check mark in the top panel to confirm transform. Now we will add a hue and saturation adjustment layer. Choose the colorize option checkbox. Adjust the saturation and lightness to increase the brightness of the color, and adjust the hue slider to the color you want to make. I will be using a light blue color. You can copy my color by using the number amount associated to each adjustment slider. Once you are happy with your texture, we want to create a clipping mask so the adjustment layer only affects the texture layer. This is optional as the texture layer is the full size of the canvas, but it's a good habit to learn. Next, we want to add a solid color adjustment layer. Here you want to choose a color that is similar or slightly darker than the color of your texture layer. For me, I will choose a slightly darker blue color. This will make your texture color really pop. We want to change the blending mode to color dodge and set the opacity to around 86%. We can create a clipping mask again if you want to. Now we want to create a new layer by pressing the shortcut. For me it's Ctrl-N, or by clicking the new layer icon at the bottom of the layers panel. We will rename this layer to Splash. Now, select your brush tool, press B, or select the brush tool icon in the side panel. Use the drop-down icon next to the brush preview in the top panel, or right-click anywhere on the canvas, to bring up the brush options. We want to select the Powder 1 brush, link to download brush pack in the description. Double-click on the foreground color and choose a bright version of the color you chose for the background. For me, that is a bright blue color. Now, make sure you have the splash layer selected, and with the brush, just click once at the bottom to create a nice powder/smoky effect. You can hold Ctrl+Alt and left-click and drag left or right to increase or decrease your brush size, and you can use the arrow keys on your keyboard to change the orientation of the brush. You don't want to have a repeated pattern, so changing the size and orientation of the brush for each click is ideal to create variety. We want to be able to see the texture within the splash we just created. To do this, double-click on the splash layer to bring up the Layer Style panel. Select the Blending Options tab on the left, and we want to change the underlying layer slider at the bottom. Hold Alt and click and drag the shadow slider to the right. Holding Alt will split the slider, creating a more seamless look. We want to increase the slider until you are happy with the amount of shadows we want to show. For me, it's 0, 57 and 255. Now it's time to bring in our text. You don't have to worry about recreating the text styles from scratch as they are included in the template available in the description. Let's open our title folder in the Layers panel to reveal the text layers. To change what the text say, simply double-click on the T icon to activate edit mode, and change the text to whatever you want. The font used is called Gotham Black, and a link to download is in the description. If you want to change the gradient colors of the text style, double-click on the text layer to bring up the Layer Styles panel. Select the Gradient Overlay option, and click on the Gradient Colored bar to bring up the Gradient Editor panel. From here, just click on the left color box on the slider, double-click the color option to bring up the color picker and choose your new color. Do the same for the right slider color box. The 2.0 logo is provided in the template. It is on its own layer, so you can hide it or remove it if you don't want to include it in your thumbnail. Now, we are on to the main subject of the composition, the player, or character. First things first, we need to cut out our subject from the background. If you already have a player cut out, then you can skip this part. To mask out our subject, press shortcut W or select the Object Selection tool from the side toolbar. If you don't see the Object Selection tool, click and hold the Quick Selection tool icon to bring up the other selection tools. Now, in the top panel, there is a Select Subject button. If you are using Photoshop 2023, then there is a new option in the drop-down list for device selection or cloud selection. I will use cloud selection here, but if you don't have this option, the device selection works just fine. Photoshop will select what it thinks is the subject, and once selected we can create a clipping mask to remove the background. There are a few little areas on my subject that Photoshop didn't mask out, so to fix this, choose the Select and Mask button in the top panel. Here, we can fine-tune the mask to our liking. First thing I do when our subject is a person, is press the Refine Hair button in the top menu. This option does well to mask the hair, but it will still need some adjusting. Select the Refine Edge Brush tool, shortcut R, and then start painting on the areas that you want to remove. If you want to bring something back, simply hold Alt and paint on the areas you want to show, like I am doing with the hair here. Once we are happy with our mask, go to the Output Settings tab on the right and select New Layer with Layer Mask. Now back to our composition. My player image is facing the wrong direction, so I will press Ctrl T to free transform and right-click the subject and choose Flip Horizontal. Now is where the fun begins. We are going to add a camera raw filter to really make our subject pop on screen. Once inside the Camera Raw Filter panel, there are many different tabs of adjustments we can use. For this image, I will start out with the Basic tab. Here, I want to decrease the exposure to -35, increase the contrast a bit to 19, increase the whites to 11, and decrease the blacks to -10. For thumbnails, I like to increase the texture all the way up to around 50, and bring the clarity up to around 21. This really makes our subject stand out and give the subject a lot of depth and character. Next, I like to go to the Details tab and slightly increase the sharpening to around 20. Then, under the Effects tab, we can increase the grain to around 20 as well. And press OK. Now, we need to click and drag our subject layer and place it in our main composition. For thumbnails, the best thing to do when using a person's reaction is to make sure the subject is big and the main focal point, in this case the reaction face, catches the viewer's eyes. We can move the subject layer down underneath the title text folder so that the text is fully readable. Now it's time to create the final asset, the player or weapon stat bar. For this, we need to first create a new rectangle. We will make the width 610 pixels and the height 176 pixels. I like to add a 10 pixel radial corners, but you don't need to. Let's change the fill color to black and add a white stroke at 2 pixels thick, and change to position to inner stroke. Hold Alt and click and drag on the gameplay text to make a copy of this layer with our layer styles already applied. Bring the new layer to the top of the layer stack, and then change the text to your liking. For this I will use the word kills. Press Ctrl T to free transform the layer and hold Shift while dragging on the corner anchor to make the text smaller without distorting the aspect. We can turn off all of the drop shadow layer styles for this text as we don't need them. Now, let S drag in some guides. If you don't see the rulers, press Ctrl R, line up the guides to the top and bottom of the text. This will be the size of the inner stat boxes. Create a new rectangle shape to match our guides by holding Shift, and click and drag starting from the top guide and down to the bottom guide. Double-click on the new square layer to bring up the Layer Styles panel and add an inner glow. You can pause and copy my settings here if you want to use the same. Now, we will add a color overlay, and for me, I will use color ADC 200. With the layer selected, press Ctrl J to duplicate the layer and while holding Shift, click and drag to move the duplicate layer to the right by 13 pixels. You can also use the arrow keys on your keyboard to move the shape 1 pixel at a time. Repeat this step 13 more times to have a total of 14 boxes to look like mine. Now, we will repeat everything again for the other stat profiles you want. Here I will use damage, IQ, and ability.
Make sure to rename all of our layers to keep our panel organized. Select all of our text layers, and use the vertical evenly distribute in the Align panel to evenly space our titles. Center our titles to our background container, then reposition our stat boxes to line up like mine.
I would suggest selecting all the stat boxes and group them together and then place the groups above the stat name it is for to keep your layers organized. Here, since we have 3 boxes off the stat bar background, I figured we should add a drop shadow to the last 3 boxes. Double-click the box layer, select drop shadow, and you can copy my options here. Please note, make sure to uncheck the Use Global Light box so it doesn't change any of your other drop shadow layers. Once the drop shadow is ready, right-click on the layer and choose Copy Layer Style. Select all the other box layers you want to add the shadow to and right-click and choose Paste Layer Style. Now, create a new layer, Ctrl+N, and name it Glow. Let's change our foreground color to D9F502. Press B or select the brush tool from the sidebar and use a soft round brush. In the top left brush orientation preview, bring the bottom anchor point up to make our brush more oval and rotate it roughly to point towards top right. Let's decrease the brush size so that it's slightly larger than the box but not overlapping the box underneath. Go through and add a single click brush stroke to every other box all the way through like I do. Once you have done all boxes, press the left arrow key on your keyboard to rotate your brush head so it's facing roughly top left, and add a single click brush stroke on the same boxes again to finish the box glow. Now, while holding Ctrl, select all box layer groups as well as the glow layer, and right-click and convert to Smart Object. With the new Smart Object layer selected, create a mask layer and choose the Gradient tool. We want a simple black to white gradient, and then click and drag from right to left over the boxes to have the boxes fade out. Now select all of the stat box layers and right-click and convert to a Smart Object. Press Ctrl+T to free transform, and right-click the image and select Perspective. Use the right middle anchor point, drag it slightly up. Use the left middle anchor point, drag it slightly down and then use the bottom middle anchor point and slide it to the right. You can adjust to your liking. Press Enter or click the check mark to accept the transformation. Press Ctrl+T again and we can adjust the size and rotation to our liking. From here, all we have left to do is to add our outer border. Hold Alt and click and drag our background layer and bring it to the top of the layer stack. In the Properties panel, change the fill color to no fill, and change the stroke to white color, inner stroke position and change the size to 15 pixels. And there we have it. All done. You can go through and change any of the positions, edit the text, or add elements such as the MW2 logo like I did here. Once you are done, press Ctrl+S to save the project and then go to File, Export, and export to PNG to save your thumbnail. You can also go to File, Save As, and save a second version of the thumbnail to use as your template for your next thumbnail. Hope you enjoyed. For more Photoshop tips and tutorials be sure to subscribe, and as always, I'll catch you in the next one.